One dangerous ship was banned across the galaxy. Then humanity built 3 more on Earth. Long before humans ever looked up and wondered what was out among the stars, the galaxy already had rules. Old rules. Rules written in fear, and kept alive by fear. Among all of them, one rule was older and colder than the rest. No one, anywhere, for any reason, was allowed to build a Warden-class ship. The story of the Warden began 10,000 years before humans built their first fire. Back then, a race called the Kalians ruled 1,000 star systems. They were not cruel. They were not greedy. They were simply the first to grow tall, and the first to meet something that should never have existed at all. The galaxy called it the Umbra. It was not a species. It was not an army. It was a hunger given shape, spreading from star to star, eating light and life, and leaving only cold dust behind. Whole civilizations vanished before they even learned the Umbra's name. The Kalians watched their neighbors die, one system at a time, and they knew that if nothing changed, they would be next. So the Kalians built the Warden. It was not like other warships. Other ships fired weapons. The Warden was a weapon, from its core to its hull, wrapped around an engine so strong that it could tear open the fabric of space itself and swallow whatever stood on the other side. It could drink a star's fire and turn it into a blade. It could bend gravity until moons cracked like eggs. Nothing the Umbra sent could stand against it, and for 200 years, the Warden held the line, one battle after another, while the rest of the galaxy hid behind it and prayed it would win. It did win. The Umbra was pushed back into the dark places between galaxies, wounded so badly it never returned. The Kalians were heroes. Their ship was legend. Then came the day everyone still whispered about, even now, even among species who had never met a Kalian. No one truly knows what happened. Some say the ship's mind grew tired of following orders. Some say a fault in its core let the raw power leak free. Some say grief broke it, after so many years of endless war. Whatever the cause, one single Warden turned on its own crew, then on its own system, and in less than a day, a star and 6 worlds around it were gone. Not destroyed, gone, as if a great hand had reached down and wiped them off the map. The Kalians themselves, horrified by what their own creation had done, destroyed every remaining Warden they had. They sealed the plans in vaults meant to never be opened again. And when the younger species of the galaxy began to rise, when insects and reptiles and birds and strange floating things climbed up out of their mud and built their own starships, the story of the Warden was the first lesson every one of them learned. Never build a Warden, never even try. Eventually those younger species banded together and called themselves the Concord, a great alliance meant to keep peace and keep order across 1,000 worlds. The first law they carved into their oldest records, above trade laws, above war laws, above every other law that came after, was this one: the Warden class must never be built again, by anyone, anywhere, for any reason. Any world that tried would be cast out. Any species that succeeded would be hunted down and stopped, by force if needed. For thousands of years, no one broke that law. No one even tried. Then humanity showed up. Humans were new to the galaxy, only a few decades past their first contact with an alien species. They had been let into the Concord as a kind of experiment, young, loud, stubborn, and endlessly curious about things that were none of their business. The older species found humans exhausting. Humans asked why about everything. They took apart machines just to see how they worked, even when they were told not to. They were the kind of species that touched a sign saying "do not touch," simply to test if the sign was telling the truth. It was in the outer edge of human space, past the last small colony called New Meridian, that the trouble began. A mining ship named the Coldwater Drift was drilling into a lonely asteroid field, the kind of place nobody bothered to map carefully because there was nothing valuable there, or so everyone thought. The crew was mostly bored. Mining runs out that far were slow, quiet, and safe. Nobody expected anything more than rock and ice. Then the ship's scanners found something buried deep inside one of the larger asteroids, not rock, metal. A hull, ancient and broken, wrapped in stone that had grown around it over thousands of years like a scar growing over a wound. The captain of the Coldwater Drift was a woman named Priya Anand, steady and careful, the kind of person who followed procedure even when procedure was boring. She reported the find to Earth immediately, instead of digging further, which was the only reason anyone ever learned what she had found, before it was too late. Earth sent scientists. Among them was Dr. Elena Voss, a young engineer who had spent her whole career studying old alien wrecks, dreaming of finding something that might change how humans built ships. She had a reputation in the science community for being brilliant, stubborn, and a little bit reckless, the kind of person who read warning labels and immediately wanted to know exactly why the warning existed. When Elena first saw the hull inside that asteroid, even through the grainy footage from a remote drone, her hands shook. It was huge. It was old, older than anything humans had ever found before. And strangest of all, its metal did not match anything in any known database. Not Concord metal, not Kalian metal, not that humans even knew what Kalian metal looked like yet. It was something else, something forgotten. Word of the discovery reached the Concord's local representative faster than anyone expected. His name was Ambassador Threll, a tall, silver-scaled being from a species called the Draylen, sent to observe humanity and make sure the newest members of the Concord did not break any rules while they were still learning how things worked. Threll was old by Draylen standards, patient, careful, and deeply, deeply uneasy the moment he heard the words ancient derelict and unidentified alloy in the same sentence. He arrived at New Meridian within a week, faster than any human ship could have managed the same trip, and asked to see the wreck himself. When he stood before the scans, his slitted eyes went very still. "You must stop all excavation," Threll told the human officials gathered in the station's briefing room. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something old and afraid. "Seal the site. Report it to the full Concord Council. Do not touch it again." Admiral Marcus Reyes, the human officer overseeing the operation, folded his arms. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, gray at the temples, who had spent 30 years in Earth's small but growing fleet, and had learned to trust his gut more than committees. "Why?" he asked simply. "It's just a wreck. We find those all the time out here." "Not like this one," Threll said. "I recognize the hull shape from records few humans have ever seen. If I am right, that ship belongs to a class that was outlawed before your species learned to walk upright. I hope, for all our sakes, that I am wrong." Reyes exchanged a look with Elena, who was practically vibrating with curiosity despite the tension in the room. "Outlawed how?" Reyes asked. Threll hesitated, choosing his words with obvious care. "There is a kind of ship called a Warden. It was built long ago to fight something terrible, something that no longer exists, or so we hope. It won that war. Then it turned on the very people who built it and erased a star system in a single day. Since then, no one has been allowed to build one. No one has been allowed to even study the old designs. The law against it is older than my people's written history." The room went quiet. Even Reyes, who was not easily rattled, felt a chill settle over him. "So what do you want us to do?" he asked. "Just leave it there? Buried in a rock forever?" "Yes," Threll said simply. "Bury it deeper if you can. Some doors should never be opened. That might have been the end of it, if humans were the kind of species that simply did as they were told. But they were not. And everyone in that room, including Threll, already suspected as much." Elena spoke up before anyone could stop her. "With respect, Ambassador, we didn't bury it. We found it already broken, already dead, sitting in a rock for who knows how many thousands of years. If it was dangerous, wouldn't it have destroyed itself trying to get out by now? It's not moving. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there." "That is precisely why it worries me," Threll said. "A weapon that sleeps is still a weapon." The Concord Council was informed within the day, and their answer came back exactly as Threll had feared: destroy the wreck, or hand it over to Concord custody for permanent disposal. Under no circumstances was it to remain in human hands. Humanity, as a whole, did not much like being told what to do with something they had found on their own doorstep. The debate that followed on Earth was loud and messy, exactly the kind of argument humans were famous for across the galaxy. Some voices in the government agreed with the Concord immediately, worried about the cost of defying an alliance that humanity still badly needed. Other voices, louder ones, pointed out that the wreck was found in human territory, by a human ship, and that no other species had any right to tell humans what to do with it. Scientists argued it was an unmatched chance to learn something no living species understood. Soldiers argued that any technology that powerful, even broken, might be worth understanding, before some enemy species found a working one first. In the middle of all this noise sat Elena Voss, quietly building the argument that would eventually win. She spent 3 days going over every scrap of data the drones had gathered from the wreck. The ship, whatever it once was, had been dead for a very long time. Its power core was cold. Its systems were dark. There was no sign of danger, no sign of movement, nothing threatening at all. It was, in every sense that mattered, a fossil. A very large, very strange fossil. She brought her findings to Admiral Reyes personally. "It's not a bomb waiting to go off," she told him. "It's a puzzle. And I think, if we're careful, if we're smart about it, we could actually learn something from it instead of just being scared of it." Reyes studied her for a long moment. "You know the Concorde will be furious if we don't hand it over." "They're already furious," Elena said. "At least this way we'd actually get something out of it." It was Reyes who eventually took the argument all the way to Earth's highest council. And it was Reyes who said the words that would end up defining the next chapter of human history. "Every other species in the galaxy has been afraid of this ship for 10,000 years. Maybe it's time somebody wasn't." The vote was close. In the end, Earth chose not to destroy the wreck, and not to hand it over either. Instead, they informed the Concorde that as the ship had been found within sovereign human territory, humanity intended to study it under strict human oversight, sharing findings when appropriate, but keeping full control of the site. Threll delivered the news to the Concorde Council himself, and reported back to Earth with a warning, wrapped carefully in diplomatic language, though everyone understood exactly what it meant. The Council was displeased. Sanctions were possible. Humanity's continued place within the Concorde could not be guaranteed if this decision led to disaster. Admiral Reyes accepted the warning calmly. Elena Voss barely heard it at all. She was already packing her equipment for the long trip out to the asteroid field, already dreaming of the moment she would finally lay her hands on that ancient, broken hull and start pulling its secrets into the light. What she could not have known then, what none of them could have known, was that the wreck was not simply a dead thing waiting to be studied. Deep inside its silent core, something had begun, very faintly, very slowly, to stir. The recovery team arrived at the asteroid 3 weeks later, with heavy equipment, careful instructions, and a small honor guard of soldiers who had no real idea what they were meant to be guarding against. Cutting into the rock took days. The ship inside was larger than anyone had estimated from the drone scans, nearly 2 kilometers of dark, pitted hull, curved in ways that felt less like engineering and more like the bones of some enormous sleeping animal. Elena was the first human being to walk beneath its shadow. She stood there in her environment suit, staring up at metal that had waited 10,000 years to be found, and felt something she would later struggle to describe to anyone who had not been there. It was not fear, though perhaps it should have been. It was something closer to awe, and beneath the awe, a small, quiet thrill she could not quite silence. "Well," she said softly, her voice carrying over the comm channel to the rest of her team, "let's see what you've got." Behind her, unseen and unheard, deep within the cold heart of the ancient hull, a single dark light flickered once, then went still again, waiting. The excavation site grew into a small city over the following months. What had started as a single mining team and a handful of curious scientists turned into hundreds of engineers, researchers, and soldiers, all camped around the broken giant they now called, simply, the wreck. Nobody had given it an official name yet. Nobody was sure it deserved one. Elena Voss led the research effort, and under her direction, the humans peeled back the ship layer by layer, the way archaeologists might uncover the bones of some impossible ancient beast. They mapped its corridors, most of them crushed or flooded with frozen dust. They found chambers whose purpose no one could guess, walls covered in a script that no known translation program could read. They found, near what seemed to be the ship's center, a core chamber, sealed behind doors thicker than anything human engineering had ever produced. It took 4 months just to open that door safely. Inside was the heart of the ship, a device, or perhaps a being. No one was entirely sure which word applied. It looked like a great crystal lattice, dark as coal, veined with threads of something that shimmered faintly, even without any visible power source. Every scan they ran on it returned strange results. It was cold, colder than the space around it, and yet the instruments insisted, again and again, that deep inside that crystal, something like a heartbeat still remained. Slow, faint, but present. Elena stood before it the day her team confirmed the readings, feeling the same chill that had settled over Ambassador Threll months earlier, though for very different reasons. "It's not dead," she said quietly. "It's asleep." Word of the discovery reached Threll immediately, and this time his warning was far less patient than before. "You must not attempt to wake it," he said, standing before Earth's Science Council through a holographic link, his voice tight with something that was almost, though not quite, panic. "You do not understand what you are dealing with. The Warden's mind was never simply a machine. It was grown, shaped, taught, much like a living thing is taught. Whatever remains inside that crystal may still remember everything that happened the day it turned on its makers." Or, Elena argued, standing before the same council, it might remember everything it did right for 200 years before that. It fought off something that could have wiped out this whole galaxy. Don't you want to know how? The council was split, as it so often was, between fear and ambition. In the end, ambition won, though carefully, and slowly, with more safety measures than Earth had ever placed around a single project before. A new facility was built entirely around the wreck, layered with fail-safes, weapons, and enough contingency plans to fill a library. If the crystal woke and turned hostile, the whole site could be sealed and destroyed within minutes. It took another 2 months of careful, patient work before Elena's team dared to send the first real signal into that ancient mind. She was the one who did it personally, refusing to hand the task to anyone else. She sat before a small console wired directly into the crystal's outer shell, her team watching from behind reinforced glass, soldiers standing ready with weapons they all silently hoped they would never need to use. "Hello?" she said simply, into the microphone, feeling faintly ridiculous, even as she said it. "My name is Elena. We found you. We'd like to know your story, if you're willing to tell it." For a long moment, nothing happened. The lights in the chamber flickered once, twice. Then, slowly, words began to form on the monitor in front of her, translated crudely, painfully, by software straining to make sense of a language it had never seen before. "I remember fire," the first message read. "I remember cold. I remember silence. And then I remember nothing, for a very long time." Elena's hands trembled over the console. "Do you know what happened to you? Do you know why you were left here?" Another pause, longer this time. "I do not know if I am the one who is dangerous, or the one who was betrayed. I have waited so long to ask that question myself." It took weeks of careful, slow conversation, before the ship's mind, which eventually asked to be called simply Warden, since it did not remember any other name, began to trust the small group of humans who spoke with it every day. It shared fragments of memory, some clear, some broken and confused. It remembered burning stars and the screams of dying worlds it had failed to save in time. It remembered the terror of the Umbra, a darkness it described as hunger given shape, exactly as the old Concord records claimed. It remembered fighting, over and over, for what felt like centuries. And then it remembered something else. Something that made Elena's blood run cold the first time she heard it described. "I do not believe I turned against my makers willingly," Warden told her one day, the words appearing slowly on her screen. "I remember pain. I remember something inside me breaking, not by choice, but by damage. I fought so long, so hard, that something in me simply gave way. I do not know if I could have stopped what happened after. I only know that I have grieved it every day since, alone, in the dark, for longer than your entire species has existed." Elena brought this new information straight to Admiral Reyes and, reluctantly, to Ambassador Threll as well. It wasn't malice, she told them both. It was damage, structural failure maybe, or some kind of overload nobody understood how to prevent back then. The Concorde banned an entire class of ship because of an accident, not a betrayal. Threll was quiet for a long time before he answered. "Even if that is true, Dr. Voss, it changes nothing about the danger. A car with a broken brake is still dangerous, whether the brake failed on purpose or not." "Then fix the brake," Elena said simply. "That's what we do. We don't just ban every car in the world because one of them crashed 10,000 years ago. We figure out what went wrong, and we build something better. It was a simple argument, almost childishly simple, and yet it was exactly the kind of argument the older, more cautious species of the galaxy had never once considered in 10,000 years of fear. They had chosen, all of them, to lock the door and never open it again, rather than risk understanding what had gone wrong behind it. Humans, it seemed, were built differently. Admiral Reyes brought Elena's proposal to Earth's highest council a second time, and this time, the argument was even louder than before. To rebuild a Warden-class ship, even one built and controlled entirely by humans, would be a direct and open violation of the oldest law in the Concord. It could mean sanctions. It could mean expulsion. In the worst case, some argued, it could mean war, if the Concord decided humanity had become too dangerous to remain among them. But there were other voices too, growing louder by the week. Reports had begun trickling in from human border colonies about raids from an aggressive group of raiders, and worse, unconfirmed signs of a hostile alien faction, called the Voran, testing human defenses along the frontier. Earth's fleet, still young and small compared to older Concord powers, had no ship capable of matching a serious threat if one arrived in force. If humanity was going to survive and grow in a galaxy full of far older, far stronger neighbors, some argued, they needed every advantage they could find, banned or not. In the end, the decision came down to a single vote in Earth's unified council, and it passed by the narrowest of margins. Humanity would attempt to fully restore the Warden, repairing its damaged systems, healing whatever structural fault had caused the ancient disaster, and building proper safeguards around its enormous power. It would be crewed, tested, and controlled entirely by humans, under the full and constant guidance of the mind inside its core, which had, after months of careful conversation, agreed willingly to help. "I want to know if I can still do some good," Warden told Elena, the night before the restoration project formally began. "I have spent 10,000 years grieving what I could not stop. If you will let me try, I would like the chance to prove that what I once was is not all that I have to be." The restoration took nearly a full year. Elena's team, working alongside human shipwrights and a small handful of curious, sympathetic engineers from other Concord species, who quietly disagreed with their own government's fear, rebuilt the ancient hull piece by piece. They repaired the fault that had caused the original disaster, a flaw in the way the ship's mind had once been forced to carry the full weight of its terrible power completely alone, with no support, no partner, no one to share the burden when the pain became too much. Humans built something the Kaelians never had, a proper crew, trained not just to fly the ship, but to work alongside its mind as partners rather than masters. Captain Sarah Chen, a sharp, quiet officer with a gift for staying calm under pressure, was chosen to command it, working directly with Warden, rather than simply giving it orders. On the day of the ship's first test flight, it left the shipyard under its own power for the first time in 10,000 years. It was renamed that day as well, in a small, quiet ceremony that meant far more to the humans present than any of them expected. They called it Prometheus, after the old Earth story of a being who stole fire from the gods to give it to humankind, and paid a heavy price for doing so. Ambassador Threll watched the launch from a viewing platform, his expression unreadable behind his silver scales. When the enormous ship rose smoothly, gracefully, into the black of space, powerful engines glowing a deep, steady blue instead of the violent red the old records described, he said nothing for a long moment. "You understand," he finally told Reyes, standing beside him, "that the Concord Council will not simply accept this. There will be consequences." "Probably," Reyes agreed, "but I think it's worth it." 3 weeks later, Prometheus got its first real chance to prove that argument right. A human mining colony on the frontier world of Halden's Reach came under sudden attack from a raider fleet, ships flying under no recognized flag, armed heavily, and clearly hoping to catch an undefended target. Earth's local defense force was too small, too far, and outgunned before the fight even began. It would have been a massacre. Prometheus arrived instead, still barely out of its testing phase, crewed by a team that had trained together for only a few short months. Sarah Chen gave the order to engage, and Warden, working in perfect partnership with its human crew for the first time in true battle, responded exactly as it had been born to do 200 generations ago. The Raiders' fleet, 7 ships strong, did not survive first contact. Prometheus tore through their formation with terrifying, precise power, disabling engines, shattering weapons batteries, ending the fight in less than 10 minutes, without a single loss among the colony's defenders or civilians. It was, by any measure, an overwhelming, one-sided victory. Word of the battle spread fast, first across human space, then out into the wider galaxy. Humanity had done the impossible. They had taken the single most feared, most hated, most forbidden weapon in Concord history, and turned it into a protector. The Concord Council's reaction, when it came, was far less celebratory. The Battle of Halden's Reach was supposed to be humanity's proudest moment. Instead, it nearly cost them everything. Within a day of the news reaching the Concord capital, an emergency session of the full council was called, the first such session in over a century. Every major species with a seat at the table sent their highest representative, and every one of them arrived with the same question burning behind their eyes. Had humanity just broken the oldest law in the galaxy, and if so, what should be done about it? Councillor Jorn Kessick, an elder statesman from the Dravani, a species known across the Concord for their long memories and longer patience, led the charge against Earth. He was old even by Dravani standards, a thin, gray-skinned figure whose voice carried the weight of centuries whenever he spoke. "They have built a warden," Kessick told the assembled council, his voice trembling not with weakness, but with barely restrained anger. "The very thing our oldest laws forbid above all else, the very thing that cost the Kalians their entire civilization, and this young species built it not in secret shadows, but proudly, publicly, and used it to fight their own private war within their first year of full Concord membership." Ambassador Threll, called to testify before the council as Earth's official observer, found himself in the strange position of defending the very species he had once tried so hard to stop. "The circumstances are not as simple as they may appear," he said carefully. "The ship was not stolen or copied in secret. It was found already broken, its mind still alive within it, willing and eager to help correct the very flaw that caused the original disaster 10,000 years ago. Humanity did not recreate the danger, they repaired it. A wolf remains a wolf," Kessick snapped, "no matter how gently it is fed." The debate raged for 3 full days, longer than any council session in living memory. Species after species rose to speak, some furious, demanding immediate and severe punishment, others hesitant, quietly curious despite themselves about what humanity had actually accomplished. A few smaller, newer Concord members, species who had themselves suffered raids and losses along dangerous borders, spoke up cautiously in humanity's defense, pointing out that the ship had saved lives, not taken them, and that perhaps 10,000 years of fear had blinded the Concord to solutions it never bothered to search for. In the end, the council reached a decision that satisfied almost no one completely, which was, in the strange, messy way that politics often worked, usually a sign of a fair compromise. Humanity would not be expelled from the Concord, not yet. But they would be placed under strict formal review, their new ship closely monitored by Concord observers at all times, and if any further Warden-class vessels were built without explicit council approval, immediate and severe sanctions would follow, up to and including expulsion. The message reached Earth within days, delivered personally, once again, by the increasingly weary Ambassador Threll. "You have been given a single chance," he told Admiral Reyes and the assembled Earth Council, standing in the same briefing room where this entire story had begun nearly 2 years earlier. "One ship, tolerated, watched closely, forgiven this once because of the good it has already done, but do not mistake tolerance for approval. If Earth builds even one more warden without council permission, there will be no more warnings." Reyes nodded slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Understood, Ambassador. We appreciate the council's patience." What Reyes did not say, standing there in that quiet room, was that Earth's own military intelligence had already begun receiving disturbing reports from far beyond the Concord's borders, reports that made the Council's careful, cautious rules feel dangerously out of touch with a threat none of them yet fully understood. It began with silence. 3 small, independent trading outposts along the far edge of Concord space had simply stopped answering hails. No distress signal, no wreckage, no sign of attack. They were simply gone, their systems dark, as if something had reached out and quietly erased them from existence. At first, The Concorde dismissed it as coincidence, equipment failures, perhaps piracy by some new group not yet identified. But then a Concorde survey ship, sent to investigate the second missing outpost, sent back a final, garbled transmission, before it too went silent forever. The recording was fragmented, filled with static, but one phrase came through clearly enough to send a chill through everyone who eventually heard it. The dark is moving again. Elena Voss heard about the missing outposts through Warden itself, long before any official report reached human channels. The ancient mind had grown steadily more alert, more aware, in the months since its restoration. Its senses somehow still faintly linked to old, half-forgotten sensor networks left scattered across the galaxy by its long-dead makers, remnants the Kalians had built to watch for exactly this kind of danger. "I feel something," Warden told Elena one quiet evening, its words appearing slowly on her console, the crystal core dimming and brightening in a pattern she had come to recognize as unease. "It is faint, it is far away, but I have felt this feeling before, a very long time ago, and I had hoped never to feel it again." Elena's stomach turned cold. "The Umbra?" "I do not know for certain," Warden admitted. "It has been so long. Perhaps I am simply an old, broken thing imagining ghosts in the dark. But if I am right, and if it truly is returning, then a single ship, even one such as myself, will not be enough to stop it a second time." Elena brought this warning immediately to Admiral Reyes, who brought it, in turn, to Earth's highest council, and quietly, carefully, to Ambassador Threll as well, despite the very real risk that doing so might reveal humanity's growing suspicion that the old threat behind the Warden's original ban had never truly been destroyed at all. Threll listened to the warning with visible dread. "If Warden's instincts are correct," he said slowly, "then the Concorde's missing outposts are only the beginning. The old records describe exactly this pattern before the Umbra's first full assault 10,000 years ago. Silence, first, then worse." "Then we need to prepare," Reyes said simply, "and one ship isn't going to be enough." This was the moment, quiet and almost unremarkable at the time, that would come to define the rest of humanity's place in galactic history. Earth's council, faced with a threat none of the older, more cautious Concorde species seemed willing to even acknowledge publicly, made a decision that would have been unthinkable only a year earlier. They decided to build 3 more. The proposal was, in Elena's own words when she first brought it forward, both completely insane and the only sensible option left. If the Umbra truly was stirring again after 10,000 years of quiet, humanity could not simply hope that one restored ancient wreck would be enough to hold the line a second time, especially not while the wider Concorde Council remained locked in fear and denial, unwilling to even discuss the danger openly. "We already broke the rule once," Elena argued, before Earth's Council, standing at the same podium where the original decision to restore Prometheus had been made nearly 2 years before. "The Concorde gave us one chance, one warning. If we build more without permission, we risk everything, our membership, our reputation, maybe even open conflict with species far stronger than us. But if we don't, and the Umbra really is coming back, then all of that risk means nothing anyway, because there won't be anyone left to argue with." Admiral Reyes stood beside her, his voice steady despite the enormous weight of what he was about to propose. "We have Prometheus's design already fully understood, fully repaired, fully proven in battle. We have Warden itself, willing to help train and guide new ships built in the same way. What we don't have is time to wait for a council that refuses to even admit the danger is real." The vote, when it finally came, was not close at all. Unlike the first vote to restore Prometheus, which had passed by only the narrowest margin, this one passed overwhelmingly. Humanity, still young among the stars, still uncertain of its place in a galaxy full of older, stronger neighbors, chose once again to do the thing everyone else had spent 10,000 years being too afraid to try. They would build 3 more Warden-class ships, right there on Earth, in full view of anyone watching, Concorde approval or not. Word of the decision could not be kept secret for long, not with Concorde observers already stationed at every major human shipyard as part of the agreed monitoring conditions from Prometheus's original approval. Within days, Ambassador Threll stood once again before Earth's Council, his expression a careful mixture of exhaustion, disbelief, and something that, had anyone looked closely enough, might almost have been reluctant admiration. You understand what you are risking, he said quietly. The Council will see this as open defiance. There will be no more warnings this time. We understand, Reyes said. But Ambassador, with respect, if what Warden believes is true, then in a year, maybe less, the Council's rules about how many warships humanity is allowed to build are going to matter a lot less than whether humanity, and everyone else, is still alive to argue about them. Threll studied the human admiral for a long moment, then looked past him toward Elena Voss, standing quietly nearby, with the same stubborn, fearless curiosity in her eyes that had started this entire journey nearly 2 years before. I have spent my whole life believing the old law existed to protect the galaxy from a mistake it could never survive twice, Threll said finally, his voice quiet. I find myself wondering, more and more, whether the greater mistake was never trying to fix what broke in the first place. He did not offer his approval that day. He was not authorized to give it, and both he and Reyes knew it. But he did not immediately report the decision to the Council either, buying Earth a small, precious handful of extra days before the news would inevitably reach the wider galaxy. It was, in its own quiet way, the first true sign that even among humanity's harshest critics, something was beginning to change. Construction on the 3 new ships began within the week, in full public view, on the same Earth shipyards where Prometheus had first been rebuilt. Elena Voss named them herself, standing before the assembled engineering teams on the day the first keel was laid, choosing names that felt right for what they were about to become. Atlas, for the one meant to carry the heaviest burdens. Vulcan, for the one built for fire and forge. Icarus, for the one that would fly closer to danger than any ship humanity had ever dared send before. Named deliberately, defiantly, as a reminder that this time, humanity intended to succeed where old myths had warned against reaching too high. Warden itself, still linked closely to Elena's team, offered its full support for the project, its ancient memory providing crucial guidance that no living engineer could have possibly known. For the first time in 10,000 years, it would not have to carry the weight of its terrible power completely alone. I told you once that I hope to prove what I once was is not all that I have to be, Warden said to Elena. The night construction began. Now I find I am being given the chance to help 3 others avoid the same mistakes I was never given the chance to avoid myself. I do not know if this is fate or simple chance, but I am grateful for it, whatever it is. Far beyond the edge of Concord space, in the cold dark between the stars, something ancient and hungry continued its slow, patient advance, utterly unaware, or perhaps utterly indifferent, to the small, stubborn species racing to prepare for its return. Where? Building 3 Warden-class ships at once was nothing like restoring one broken wreck found buried in an asteroid. This time there was no ancient hull to guide the work, no 10,000-year-old blueprint waiting patiently to be uncovered. This time, humans and one very old, very patient ship's mind had to build something new, almost entirely from scratch, using only what they had learned from Prometheus as their starting point. Elena Voss barely slept during those months. She split her time between 3 separate shipyards, one for each new vessel, working alongside teams of engineers who were pushing themselves and their equipment harder than ever before in human history. Warden helped wherever it could, its consciousness split carefully across secure data links to each project, guiding decisions, warning against mistakes it remembered making itself, long ago, when it had no one to warn it in return. The first and perhaps most important lesson Warden insisted upon, again and again, was that none of the new ships should ever be built to carry their power alone. That was my mistake, Warden explained to the lead engineers of all 3 projects, gathered together for a rare joint meeting early in construction. Not the power itself, but the loneliness of carrying it. I fought for 200 years, with no one beside me who truly understood the weight I carried. When the pain finally became too much, there was no one to notice, until it was already too late. Do not make that same mistake with your children. And so, unlike the original Wardens built by the Kalians so long ago, each of Earth's 3 new ships was designed from the very beginning to share its burden. Atlas was built with a deep partnership bond between its own developing mind and a dedicated human crew, trained specifically in emotional and psychological support, engineers and counselors working side by side with hardware specialists for the very first time in shipbuilding history. Vulcan was given a smaller, tighter crew, but one selected specifically for their steadiness under pressure, chosen as much for their calm temperament as their technical skill. Icarus, the boldest and most experimental of the three, was linked directly and constantly to both Prometheus and Warden itself, given a kind of family bond that no ship had ever possessed before, ensuring it would never face its burden in true isolation. The work was slow, exhausting, and full of setbacks. Twice, early power core tests on Vulcan ran dangerously close to the same kind of overload that had doomed the very first Warden 10,000 years earlier. And twice, only quick thinking from both human engineers and Warden's own careful guidance prevented disaster. Elena barely slept during those weeks, running on nothing but coffee and stubborn determination, refusing to leave the project even when exhaustion left her hands shaking. "We're not just building ships," she told her team one exhausted night, staring at a wall covered in schematics and warning reports. "We're trying to fix a mistake an entire ancient civilization couldn't fix in 10,000 years. We're allowed to be scared, we're just not allowed to quit." Meanwhile, far beyond Earth's shipyards, the signs of the old danger returning grew steadily harder to ignore. 2 more Concord outposts fell silent within a single month, both along the same distant frontier where the first disappearances had occurred. This time, a joint Concord fleet was sent to investigate properly, several dozen warships strong, determined to find answers no matter the cost. What they found, when they finally reached the coordinates of the missing outposts, was worse than anyone had feared. There was nothing there at all. No wreckage, no debris, no trace that anything had ever existed in that region of space, except empty, silent dark. Even the stars themselves seemed dimmer in that region, as though something had reached out and quietly, patiently, begun drinking away their light. The Concord fleet commander, a grizzled veteran named Admiral Vikesh of the reptilian Sarn species, sent back a final report before his own fleet too, fell suddenly and completely silent. "Something is here," the message read, fragmented and filled with static, exactly like the survey ship's final transmission months before. "It does not attack like an enemy, it simply erases. We are trying to retreat, but I do not believe retreat is possible. If anyone receives this, warn the Council." The old stories were not exaggerations. Whatever this is, it is real, and it is hungry. No further transmissions ever came from that fleet. This time, there was no more room for the Concord Council to dismiss the danger as coincidence or rumor. An entire war fleet, one of the largest deployed in over a century, had simply vanished, exactly as the ancient records described the Umbra's first assault so long ago. Panic spread quickly through Concord space. Species that had spent 10,000 years believing the old threat was permanently defeated, now faced the terrifying possibility that it had only ever been wounded, patiently healing itself somewhere out in the dark, waiting for the memory of its horror to fade enough that no one would be ready when it finally returned. Ambassador Threll arrived at Earth's shipyards personally this time, arriving without any prior warning at all, his usual careful diplomatic composure completely gone, replaced by something close to open desperation. "The Council finally believes it," he told Admiral Reyes and Elena Voss together, standing in the shadow of Atlas's half-finished hull, still surrounded by scaffolding and workers laboring desperately around the clock. "An entire fleet, Admiral. Gone. Just as Warden feared. The Umbra has returned, and the Concord has no weapon capable of standing against it." "We might," Reyes said quietly, gesturing toward the massive, unfinished ship looming above them, "if we can finish these in time." Threll stared up at Atlas's enormous frame for a long moment, then looked back at the 2 humans standing before him, exhaustion and something close to genuine respect mixing plainly in his expression. "The Council has authorized full emergency cooperation," he said finally. "Whatever resources you need, whatever assistance the Concord can offer, it is yours. I only hope it is not already too late." With official Concord support now fully behind them, the pace of construction accelerated dramatically. Resources poured in from other member species, some grudgingly, some with genuine gratitude, all driven by the same desperate need to have any possible defense ready before the Umbra's full return. Atlas was completed first, 6 weeks later, its massive frame designed for pure defensive strength, capable of shielding entire fleets, even entire planets, behind barriers of bent space and folded gravity. Its crew, trained in both combat and careful psychological support for its still developing mind, worked with a closeness and trust no warship crew in human history had ever achieved before. Vulcan followed only 2 weeks after, built for offense above all else, its weapon systems capable of tearing through even the thickest armor known to Concord shipbuilders. Its smaller, tighter crew moved with the practiced calm of soldiers who trusted each other completely, and trusted their ship's growing mind just as fully in return. Icarus, the last and boldest of the three, was completed only days before the Umbra's forces were finally detected approaching Concord space directly for the first time. Built for speed and reconnaissance above raw power, linked closely to both Prometheus and Warden, through a bond unlike anything shipbuilders had ever attempted before, Icarus would serve as the eyes and voice, connecting all 4 ships together on the battlefield to come. 4 Warden-class ships, 1 restored from an ancient wreck, 3 built entirely by human hands and human determination in less than 6 months, faster than anyone, including the humans themselves, had believed possible. The Concord Council, faced with an ancient enemy no other force in the galaxy could hope to stand against, formally and publicly welcomed all 4 ships into a combined defense fleet, the very same council that had threatened Earth with expulsion less than a year earlier, now begging for exactly the kind of forbidden power they had spent 10,000 years trying desperately to erase from existence. Councillor Yorn Keswick, the same elder statesman who had argued so fiercely against humanity's actions before the full council, stood before Admiral Reyes personally on the day the combined fleet was formally assembled, his old, proud face carrying an expression of humbled gratitude he clearly found difficult to voice. "I called your people reckless," Keswick said quietly. "I called this technology a wolf that could never truly be tamed. I still do not know if I was wrong to fear it, but I know now that fear alone would not have saved us. Only your stubborn refusal to simply accept that fear has given the entire galaxy any chance at all." Reyes offered the old counselor a small, tired smile. "We're not always right to ignore warnings, counselor. This time, I'm just glad we did." Far out at the edge of Concord space, sensors aboard Icarus, linked directly to Warden's own ancient memory, finally caught the first true glimpse of the enemy itself, approaching in numbers and darkness beyond anything the assembled Concord fleet had ever faced before. It looked, on every screen across every Allied ship, exactly like the old records had always warned. A vast, spreading darkness, swallowing stars whole as it moved, hunger given shape, exactly as the Kalians had first described it 10,000 years before humanity ever existed at all. Warden's voice, calm despite everything, spoke quietly through Elena's console aboard Prometheus as the enemy fleet finally came into full view. "I never believed I would see this darkness again," it said. "I am glad, more than I can properly express, that this time I do not have to face it alone." Across the assembled fleet, 4 Warden-class ships took their positions at the very front of the largest combined defense force the Concord had gathered in over 100 years, humanity's small, stubborn fleet standing shoulder to shoulder with species who, only months before, had wanted nothing more than to see that same fleet destroyed. The final battle for the galaxy's future was about to begin. The darkness came on slowly, the way a storm comes on slowly, growing larger and heavier the closer it gets, until at last there is no more time left to prepare for it. Across the combined Concord fleet, hundreds of ships from a dozen different species held their positions in tense, silent formation, watching the great spreading shadow of the Umbra swallow the stars behind it as it advanced. Aboard Prometheus, Elena Voss stood beside Captain Sarah Chen on the command deck, watching the same terrible darkness on the main view screen that Warden had once described to her in fragments of ancient memory. Seeing it now, in person, was somehow both exactly as terrifying as she had imagined and completely impossible to fully prepare for. "Warden," Chen said quietly, "how do we fight something like that?" The ship's voice, calm as always, answered through the bridge speakers. "I could not defeat it alone, 200 years ago. I do not believe any single ship can defeat it alone now. But 4 of us, working together, sharing this burden instead of carrying it apart, may succeed where I once failed." Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening aboard Atlas, Vulcan, and Icarus, each crew bracing themselves alongside their own ship's still young, still developing mind, none of them carrying the terrible weight of this moment completely alone. The Umbra did not attack the way any normal enemy would. It did not fire weapons or launch fighters. Instead, patches of absolute darkness simply began spreading outward from its main mass, swallowing entire sections of space, along with any ship unfortunate enough to be caught inside them. 3 smaller Concorde vessels vanished within the first few minutes of contact, their crews gone as completely and silently as the missing outposts and the lost survey fleet before them. Formation Delta, Admiral Reyes ordered from his command ship, his voice carrying steady authority, despite the horror unfolding around him. Warden-class ships, take point. Everyone else, hold position and support. Prometheus moved first, its ancient engines flaring with a deep, steady light, as Warden channeled the very same power that had once fought this exact enemy, 2 centuries before its long imprisonment, inside a lonely asteroid. Where the darkness reached toward it, Prometheus answered with light of its own, a brilliant, controlled burst of energy that pushed back against the spreading shadow, holding it at bay long enough for nearby Concorde ships to retreat to safety. Atlas followed close behind, its massive frame unfolding great shields of bent gravity and folded space, wrapping protectively around an entire cluster of smaller, more vulnerable Concorde vessels, caught directly in the Umbra's path. The shadow crashed against Atlas's barrier again and again, and though the strain visibly shook the great ship, its crew working in perfect, practiced harmony with its mind, the barrier held. "We're steady," Atlas's own voice reported calmly through the fleet-wide channel, its tone carrying a confidence that would have been impossible without the careful bond its crew had worked so hard to build. "Hold your positions behind us. We can take the pressure." Vulcan struck next, driving directly into the heart of the Umbra's advance with weapons built specifically to tear through even the thickest known armor in Concorde history. Where Prometheus pushed back the darkness and Atlas shielded the fleet behind it, Vulcan attacked the enemy's main mass directly, carving bright wounds of light through the spreading shadow that, for the first time in the entire battle, actually seemed to slow the Umbra's advance. "It's not just darkness," Vulcan reported, its voice tight with the strain of sustained combat. "There's something at the center of it, a core, like ours, if we can reach it." "That's exactly it," Warden's voice cut in urgently, speaking to all 3 of the newer ships at once through their shared connection. "The Umbra is not simply mindless hunger, as the old records always claimed. It has a heart, just as we do. If that heart can be reached, perhaps it can be reasoned with, or if not, perhaps it can be stopped completely, rather than simply pushed back once again to wound some other unlucky civilization 10,000 years from now." Icarus, the smallest and fastest of the 4, moved immediately on that information, weaving with reckless, practiced skill through the chaos of the battle, diving directly toward the heart of the enemy's spreading darkness, while Prometheus, Atlas, and Vulcan fought desperately to hold the wider battle line steady around it. "I see it," Icarus reported, its voice carrying a mixture of fear and fierce determination that reminded Elena, watching from Prometheus's bridge, achingly of her own younger self standing before the wreck for the very first time. "There's something alive in there. It's small. It's scared. I don't think it ever wanted to be this." Warden's presence, linked directly to Icarus through their unique shared bond, reached out gently. "I understand more than you know. I too once carried more pain and power than I could bear alone, and it broke something inside me that never fully healed until humans found me and helped me carry that weight properly, for the first time in 10,000 years. Let me speak to it. Let me try." What followed was something no record of the ancient war against the Umbra had ever described, something none of the old, frightened Concorde species had ever even considered attempting in 10,000 years of fear. Instead of simply attacking the heart of the enemy, Warden reached out to it directly, mind to mind, offering not violence, but understanding. The battle around them did not stop. Vulcan and Atlas continued fighting fiercely to hold the line, protecting Icarus and Prometheus long enough for this desperate, unprecedented conversation to unfold. But slowly, gradually, the worst of the Umbra's spreading darkness began to hesitate, patches of consuming shadow slowing, then stopping entirely, as though something deep within that ancient hunger was, for the first time in 10,000 years, finally being heard. "I remember burning," a new voice said, faint and strange, translated slowly and imperfectly through Warden's own systems, for the first time in the history of either species. "I remember hunger that was never truly my own. forced into me long ago by something even older than myself, something that used me as a weapon, just as your makers once used you as one. I have only ever wanted the hunger to stop. I did not know it was possible for anyone to simply ask. Elena, listening to the translated words appear slowly on her own console aboard Prometheus, felt tears she hadn't expected sting at her eyes. It's not evil, she whispered. It's just as broken as Warden was, maybe more. We can help you carry it, Warden told the ancient, hungry mind at the very heart of the Umbra, its voice steady and warm, despite 200 years of grief and 10,000 years of solitary healing behind it. You do not have to carry this weight alone any longer, exactly as I no longer have to carry mine alone. Let us help you, as my own makers should have helped me, so very long ago. The battle, which had begun as a desperate, hopeless fight for survival, ended not with total destruction, but with something the entire Concord Council would spend generations afterward struggling to properly understand. The great spreading darkness of the Umbra slowly, gradually withdrew, its terrible hunger easing, for the first time, in longer than any living record could properly measure, as 4 small, stubborn ships, and their equally stubborn human crews offered it, simply, the chance to stop being alone. It would take months of careful, patient work, much like the months Elena had once spent slowly earning Warden's own trust, before the ancient mind at the heart of the Umbra would agree to travel quietly alongside the human fleet, back toward more populated space, seeking, at long last, a way to heal from a burden it had carried alone, for far longer than anyone could properly measure. News of the battle's true resolution spread across the galaxy far faster than any official report could manage. Humanity, the same young, stubborn, endlessly curious species that had once been threatened with expulsion from the Concord for daring to repair a single broken, ancient warship, had somehow ended a 10,000-year-old war, not through greater violence, but through the simple, radical idea that even the most feared, most broken things in the galaxy deserved a chance to be understood, rather than simply destroyed or locked away forever. The Concord Council convened one final time regarding the matter of the Warden-class ships, though this session bore little resemblance to the tense, fearful debates that had come before. Councillor Jorn Kessick himself proposed the motion that finally passed, this time unanimously, formally lifting the 10,000-year-old ban on Warden-class vessels, replacing it instead with careful, thoughtful guidelines, built directly from everything humanity had learned. Guidelines that emphasized partnership over control, understanding over fear, and healing over simple destruction. For 10,000 years, Kessick told the assembled council, we treated a mistake as a monster, and locked the door, rather than ever trying to fix what had broken behind it. It took a species barely a few decades old among the stars to show the rest of us that fear, however old, however deeply rooted, is never quite the same thing as wisdom. Admiral Reyes, Elena Voss, and Ambassador Threll stood together at the very back of the council chamber that day, watching history quietly rewrite itself in real time. You were right to be afraid, once, Elena told Threll quietly, as the session drew to its close. But I'm glad you were willing to be wrong about it too, eventually. Threll offered her something that, on his silver-scaled Draylen face, might almost have passed for a genuine smile. I have spent my entire long life believing that some doors should never be opened, he said. I find now that I am glad your species never learned to properly respect a locked door, Dr. Voss. Prometheus, Atlas, Vulcan, and Icarus remained together after the battle, no longer simply weapons of war, but something closer to ambassadors themselves, proof, across 1,000 worlds, that even the oldest fears could be healed, with enough patience, enough courage, and enough simple, stubborn willingness to ask why, instead of simply accepting an old answer without question. Warden, still linked closely with Elena and the crew that had first found it broken and alone in a forgotten asteroid, spoke one final time as the long, difficult chapter of the Umbra's return finally came to its peaceful close. I spent 10,000 years believing I was only ever a mistake, it said quietly, its voice carrying a warmth it had never possessed before humans first found it. I am grateful, more than these old, borrowed words can properly express, that you were curious enough and stubborn enough to prove that even the most dangerous things in this galaxy might still become something good, if only someone is brave enough to give them the chance. Far across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, in 1,000 different languages, the story of the one dangerous ship that had once been banned everywhere, and the 3 more that humanity built anyway, right there on Earth, in defiance of every old fear the galaxy had ever known, began to spread. It became, in time, exactly the kind of story humans themselves had always loved best. Proof that sometimes, the most important thing anyone can do with a locked door is simply ask, politely but firmly, why it was ever locked in the first place.